regarding the changes? Okay, so we'll talk about the changes more in depth in just a minute, but I'd like to give you a little bit of a background as to why we're making these changes. Originally, the Mass was said in Latin. Before Vatican II, most of maybe your parents, but definitely your grandparents, went to Mass, and it was said in Latin. The priest was facing the opposite side, so his back was to the congregation. These things were changed in Vatican II. After Vatican II, the Mass was translated into the language of the people. So if we were in Germany, we would be saying Mass in German. But since we live here, we say Mass in English, unless you go to Spanish Mass, right? One thing about Spanish Mass isn't changing very much. The reason is because the Latin to Spanish translation is a little bit more accurate than the Latin to English translation. Fun fact, right? When we translated the Mass from Latin to English, we lost some of the original meaning of the Latin. So you've heard of the phrase lost in translation? Yes? Yes? So my native Spanish speakers will understand this a little bit better because there are some things that you just can't translate from Spanish to English, right? You're just like, I just don't really know how to translate that. And this is what we're sort of trying to get back to. We're trying to go back to what the Latin is really trying to say, the meaning that the Latin really had, and that's why we're having these changes. Okay, are there any questions? Holly?
When are these changes going to be implemented?
November 27th will be the first Advent Mass, and that is when the priest will change the Mass. And so the congregation will have to start practicing these changes on November 27th. Jelly?
Do you think these changes are for the better or for the worse?
You know, I think a lot of people are going to struggle. I think that's a given. I think when change happens, people fight against it. But I do think that going back to the original meaning is a little bit more, it's a step forward instead of a step back, although some people will say, are you going back to before Vatican II? I don't think so. Yeah. Kelly?
So do you think people are actually going to, like, say these changes, or they're still going to say them, like, the way we've been saying them for a long time?
So I think that people that don't attend Mass very frequently may attend Mass for, let's say, like Christmas, like, you know, we have the Christmas and Easter Catholics. They're going to be sort of blown out of the water with the changes. They're going to start with what they normally say, and everyone's going to be saying something else, and they're going to freak out, right? The hard part is we've been saying this since we were infants, for most of us, right? And the hard part is, how do we all of a sudden memorize something new? It's doable. Yeah, it's definitely doable. But one thing I would say is to not be embarrassed that you don't know the new words, because nobody does. Even the priests are getting a new lectionary, and it's big, and there's a lot of new stuff that they have to say. They will be reading from it. The one thing I would invite you to do is to bring these, or if you have a nicer copy, I know that this isn't the nicest copy, I would bring it to Mass to help you through, because your participation in the Mass is vital for Mass. The reason as Catholics we are called to go to Mass is not what Mass can do for us necessarily, but what we're supposed to do for the larger Catholic community, right? If you don't go to Mass and your neighbor doesn't go to Mass, then what community exists there? Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so really briefly, if we could just look at the paper on the side that says Dialogue at the Gospel on the top left, if you could find that. The biggest change for you is going to be the thing that you say most frequently, which is when the priest says, "May the Lord be with you," and you're going to say,
And with your spirit.
"And with your spirit." That's the change. That's the biggest change that you say most frequently. We'll touch on these a little bit more next class, so make sure to bring these to class. Okay? Thank you.